The whispering shadows. The small town of Ravenswood was shrouded in fog that night. The streets, once lively and filled with laughter, were now silent, as if the town itself was holding its breath. A full moon cast an eerie glow on the empty houses, their windows like dark eyes staring out into the nothingness. Among these houses was a large, decrepit mansion on the outskirts of town, abandoned for years. It had stood there for generations, its walls heavy with secrets and its creaking floors echoing through the stillness. This was the house Emily had inherited from her late aunt, Clara. Emily, a young woman in her late 20s, had moved to Ravenswood in search of a fresh start. After the death of her aunt, she was left with the mansion, an inheritance that was both a gift and a curse. Her aunt's death had been sudden, and there were few details surrounding it, just a brief phone call to Emily saying, "It's too late, Emily. Don't come here." That was the last time they had spoken. With a mixture of grief and curiosity, Emily arrived at the mansion several weeks later. The moment she stepped onto the property, something felt off. The air was heavy, as though the house itself was alive, watching her, waiting for her to step inside. But she pushed the feeling aside. After all, the house was hers now. The first few days in the mansion were quiet, with Emily cleaning and sorting through her aunt's belongings. The house was a maze of dark hallways and rooms filled with old furniture covered in dust sheets. But despite the unsettling atmosphere, Emily found solace in the solitude, thinking that maybe the mansion could give her the peace she needed. Then, on the night of the third week, everything changed. It was an unusually cold evening, and Emily had decided to stay in the living room, curled up with a book. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, the only warmth in the room. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but Emily found it oddly comforting. The house was quiet, too quiet. She could feel it, a presence lingering just beyond the edge of her awareness, like a shadow that followed her every movement. Suddenly, she heard it. A soft, barely audible whisper. It seemed to come from the hallway just outside the room, but when she listened closely, there was no one there. She thought it was the wind, but as the whisper grew clearer, she realized it was a voice, a man's voice. "Emily, Emily, you shouldn't have come." Her heart skipped a beat. The voice was familiar in some strange way, but she couldn't place it. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and an unsettling chill swept over her. She stood up, her book slipping from her hands and falling to the floor with a soft thud. The house felt colder now, the air thick with something unexplainable. Taking a deep breath, Emily walked toward the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the stillness of the mansion. She turned the corner and found nothing. The hallway was empty, just a long stretch of shadows and the faint gleam of the moonlight seeping through the cracks in the curtains. But the whispering continued. "Emily, you shouldn't have come." The voice was louder now, almost desperate. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She knew she should turn around and leave, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. She took another step forward, her hand trembling as she reached for the door at the end of the hallway, the door that led to the basement. The door had always been locked, and it was the one room in the entire mansion her aunt had forbidden her to enter. But tonight, it seemed to call her. The door creaked open as if someone had unlocked it. A gust of cold air rushed up from the basement, and the whispering intensified. It was now mixed with other voices, all speaking in hushed tones, all saying the same thing: "You shouldn't have come." Emily's breath hitched, but she could not stop herself. She stepped into the darkened stairwell, the smell of rot and mildew filling her nostrils. The basement was the one place her aunt had refused to talk about, and now it seemed that she had to face whatever lay within it. The stairs groaned under her weight as she descended deeper into the darkness. The flickering light at the bottom of the stairs cast long, grotesque shadows on the walls, and Emily felt as if the house was alive, watching her every move. Her pulse raced, but she couldn't turn back now. At the bottom of the stairs, the basement was a large, cold space, cluttered with old furniture, broken appliances, and forgotten relics of a time long past. The air was thick with dust, and cobwebs clung to the corners of the room like the remnants of forgotten lives. But it wasn't the old things that caught her attention. It was the figure standing in the corner of the room, half hidden in the shadows. A man. Tall and gaunt, his face pale, his clothes ragged. His eyes gleamed with an unnatural light, like something not entirely human. He seemed to materialize from the darkness itself, and when Emily saw him, her heart nearly stopped. "You shouldn't have come," the man said, his voice raspy, as if he hadn't spoken in years. His grin was wide, twisted, and full of malice. Emily took a step back, her body frozen in fear. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The man took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. You see, Emily, I've been waiting for you, the man whispered. His voice was softer now, but it carried an unsettling weight. I've been waiting for the one who would finish what was started. Emily's mind raced. Who was this man? Why did he know her name? And what did he mean by, finish what was started? She tried to turn and run, but her feet were glued to the floor. The man stepped closer, his presence suffocating, like the walls themselves were closing in on her. And then, in a voice that seemed to echo from all around her, he spoke again. Your aunt was the first. But now, it's your turn. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet gave way. She fell, the darkness swallowing her whole. When Emily awoke, she was no longer in the basement. The room was familiar, her own bedroom, but everything was wrong. The shadows were deeper than they should have been, and the air was thick with a presence she couldn't explain. She tried to move, but her limbs were heavy, like she was trapped in a dream she couldn't escape. Her heart hammered in her chest as she realized something terrible. She was not alone. The man, the ghost, was standing by the foot of her bed, his glowing eyes fixed on her. His grin was wider now, more sinister. You shouldn't have come, Emily, he said, his voice a low whisper. You see, you've always been a part of this house. A part of its darkness. The whispers returned, louder than ever, coming from the very walls around her. They were a chorus of voices, each one speaking in tones of sorrow and anger, echoing through her mind. It was as if the house itself was alive, and its very essence had been waiting for her arrival. Emily's blood ran cold as she realized the horrifying truth: she had always been part of the house. The death of her aunt had not been an accident. It was part of the curse that bound the house, a curse that had waited for generations, for someone like Emily to finally return and complete what had been started so many years ago. The house, the ghost, and the whispers, they were all part of a greater design. And now, there was no escaping. The last thing Emily heard before everything went black was the man's voice, soft and haunting, as it echoed in her ears. You shouldn't have come.